What happens when a life is taken not just from the world of the living, but from the peace of the afterlife? What if the victim refuses to rest? Tonight, we journey into the heart of a mystery where a brutal crime bled into the realm of legend, and where the line between justice and vengeance became forever blurred. This is the harrowing and chilling case of Eleanor Gray, a murder so sinister, it sparked a ghost's revenge. Our story begins in the fading light of the Gilded Age, in the year 1887, in the quiet, isolated mill town of Blackwater, Massachusetts. Picture this place in your mind. A community nestled in a valley, perpetually shrouded in the mist rising from the river that gave it its name. The air, thick with the smell of damp earth and pine, carried the constant rhythmic thrum of the textile mill, the heartbeat of the town and the source of its livelihood. It was here that Eleanor Gray lived, a woman who, by all accounts, was the very soul of the community. She was 24 years old, with eyes the color of a stormy sea and hair the shade of rich mahogany, often pinned up in a practical yet elegant style. She was not from wealth, she was a seamstress, her skilled fingers creating beauty from simple cloth for the wives of the mill owners and the local folk alike. But Eleanor possessed another, more subtle talent, a deep, intuitive kindness. She was the one who brought soups to the sick, who mended clothes for the poor without expectation of payment, and whose gentle laughter could brighten the drabbest of New England days. In a town where life was often defined by hard labor and silent hardship, Eleanor Gray was a solitary candle flame in the encroaching darkness. However, shadows are cast by light, and Eleanor's radiance attracted a darkness she could never have anticipated. Her kindness was misinterpreted by a man whose soul was a cavern of obsession and possession. His name was Alistair Finch, the foreman of the Blackwater Mill. He was a man in his 40s, with a rigid posture and cold, calculating eyes that missed nothing on the factory floor. Alistair saw Eleanor not as a person, but as an object to be acquired. He began with what he perceived as courtship, leaving small, expensive gifts on her doorstep, waiting for her after church, his presence an unyielding pressure. But his advances were not those of a gentle suitor. They were the claiming gestures of a predator. When Eleanor, with a firm but polite finality, refused his proposal of marriage, the civility in Alistair Finch's eyes shattered. The autumn of 1887 bled into a particularly harsh winter. The world outside grew quiet, muffled by a thick blanket of snow, but the silence in Blackwater became oppressive, charged with a tension you could feel in the marrow of your bones. Neighbors began to notice a change in Alistair. He became withdrawn, his temper at the mill legendary and terrifying. He would be seen standing in the snow outside Eleanor's small cottage, a solitary, menacing figure for hours on end, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Then, on the night of December 18th, 1887, the fragile peace of Blackwater was shattered forever. A fierce blizzard had descended, howling around the eaves of the houses, a white wall of fury that isolated the town from the world. It was on this night that Eleanor Gray vanished. The following morning, when the storm had subsided to a gentle fall, a young boy delivering firewood found Eleanor's front door ajar, swinging lazily in the bitter wind. Inside, the cottage was in disarray. A chair was overturned, and a half-finished embroidery hoop lay on the floor, its bright thread a stark contrast to the ominous dark stain soaking into the wooden floorboards near the hearth. There was no sign of Eleanor. A frantic search commenced, the townsfolk trudging through the deep snow, their calls for her swallowed by the immense white silence. But they found nothing. It was as if the storm itself had snatched her from the face of the earth. The only clue was a single man's leather glove, frozen stiff, found near the tree line at the edge of town. Everyone knew who it belonged to. Everyone whispered the name: Alistair Finch. The town constable, a man named Samuel Higgins, was hesitant. Alistair was a man of standing, and the evidence was circumstantial. When confronted, Alistair was cool and composed. He claimed he had been at the mill throughout the storm, overseeing emergency repairs. He had witnesses, other foremen who corroborated his story, their eyes darting away from the constable's gaze. The investigation stalled. Without a body, there could be no murder charge. A deep and frigid stillness fell over Blackwater, colder than the winter itself. Alistair Finch walked the streets a free man, but the air around him seemed to grow thin and cold. The community's suspicion was a palpable force, a collective judgment passed in silence. It was in this void of official justice that the first whispers began. Whispers that Eleanor Gray was not truly gone. It started subtly. The night watchman at the mill reported seeing a female figure in a dark dress standing by the river, her form half obscured by the mist. He called out, but she vanished. Then, children began talking of a sad lady who would appear at the edge of the woods, watching them before fading back into the shadows. These were dismissed as fantasies, the products of grief and an overactive imagination. But the phenomena escalated. Alistair Finch, now a pariah in his own town, began to change. His once imposing frame seemed to shrink. He was often heard muttering to himself, his eyes perpetually wide with a terror he could not name. He told the bartender at the local tavern, in a moment of drunken weakness, that he could feel a presence in his house, a cold spot that moved from room to room, and the faint, unmistakable scent of lavender and thread, Eleanor's signature scent. Then, on the first anniversary of Eleanor's disappearance, the supernatural asserted itself with violent clarity. Alistair was found by his housemaid, cowering in a corner of his study. The room was in chaos. Books thrown from shelves, ink spilled like blood across his desk, and etched into the wood of the floorboards, as if by an invisible burning finger, was a single word: murderer. The legend of Eleanor's ghost was no longer a whisper. It was a scream that echoed through the valley. The haunting was no longer subtle. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways of the mill after hours. The portrait of Alistair's father that hung in his home was found slashed, the eyes gouged out. But the most chilling account came from two fishermen on the river before dawn. They saw a pale, luminous figure standing on the bank, pointing a spectral finger directly at the Finch residence. The pressure, both earthly and unearthly, began to crush Alistair Finch. His health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from waking nightmares, screaming that he could see Eleanor at the foot of his bed, her stormy eyes now pools of black void, her mouth open in a silent accusation. Doctors called it a nervous breakdown, a madness born of a guilty conscience. But the people of Blackwater knew better. They called it a curse. 3 years to the day after Eleanor Gray vanished, the river gave up its secret. The spring thaw was particularly vigorous that year, and the swollen, rushing waters of the Blackwater River dislodged a heavy, burlap-wrapped object that had been weighed down with stones. It was Eleanor's body, perfectly preserved by the icy water. The cause of death was clear, a single, brutal blow to the head. With the body found, the official investigation was reopened. The townsfolk, emboldened by the supernatural events and the tangible evidence, came forward with stories they had been too afraid to tell. A stable hand confessed he had seen Alistair near Eleanor's cottage on the night of the storm. The other foremen, their consciences gnawed by years of silence, admitted Alistair had bribed them to provide a false alibi. Alistair Finch was arrested for the murder of Eleanor Gray. There was no dramatic confession, no breakdown in the courtroom. He was a hollowed-out man, his spirit already broken by the ghost he believed had hounded him for 3 long years. He was found guilty and sentenced to hang. As the judge read the verdict, witnesses claimed to see a fleeting shadow, a cool breeze, and the faint scent of lavender pass through the stuffy courtroom. But the story does not end at the gallows. For the people of Blackwater, justice had been served, but it had been delivered by a force beyond their understanding. The legend of Eleanor's ghost did not fade. It transformed. She was no longer just a victim, but an avenging spirit, a guardian of the wronged. To this day, visitors to the now abandoned town of Blackwater report strange occurrences. Photographs taken near the old riverbank sometimes show a misty, female figure in the background. EVP recordings capture faint, whispered words like justice and remember, The ghost of Eleanor Gray, it seems, is still on watch. So what are we to make of this harrowing tale? Was Alistair Finch's descent into madness merely the psychological torment of a guilty man, his mind constructing the very haunting his conscience demanded? Or did the violence of his act truly tear a hole in the veil between our world and the next, allowing a wronged soul to return and demand what the living courts could not initially provide? The case of Eleanor Gray forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of justice. Is the cold, procedural justice of man always sufficient? Or are there crimes so heinous, so deeply felt, that they ripple through the very fabric of existence, seeking a more profound, perhaps a more personal reckoning? The chilling truth may be that some wounds never fully heal, not even in death. The story of Eleanor Gray is a somber reminder that our actions have weight, and that the shadows we cast in life may very well outlive us, becoming the specters that haunt the world we leave behind. It is a testament to the power of a love for justice so strong, it refused to be silenced by mere murder. SFX. The melancholic piano piece returns, fading out slowly. Hello everyone, and thank you for listening to this briefcase. What do you believe? Was Alistair Finch haunted by a real ghost, or was it the phantom of his own guilt? Please share your thoughts and feedback in the comments below. I look forward to reading them, and I hope to see you all again in the next archive.